When a soldier lost everyone and everything he held dear, he became a recluse. Eventually, he met two beautiful lynxes and became close to them. But then, something truly shocking and unthinkable happened. A man named George was driving home from a business trip on the other side of the country. The journey had been long, but thankfully, he was only an hour or two away from his final destination. The trip had been pretty dull so far, but as George was driving down a long straight length of the road, he spotted something up ahead. It looked like a dot in the distance, but as he drove closer, it became more and more apparent that it was a person, or more specifically, a hitchhiker. George felt particularly generous and pulled over, asking the man where he needed to go. As if by pure coincidence, the hitchhiker was going to the same city George was headed to. He hopped into the car, and the pair set off. The hitchhiker was happy to have a lift, and George was grateful for the company. As they drove, George and the hitchhiker, a man called Mick, talked about all sorts of things, including the letter's past. Mick had once been in the army. He was a soldier who had served overseas for many years and fought in various battles. He had seen his fair share of action and witnessed things that no one would be able to imagine. That's why he was so grateful when he used to come home. He had a wife waiting for him, a beautiful woman named Lucy. Mick loved Lucy with all of his heart, and the thought of her was what got him through many long, dark, and dangerous nights while serving as a soldier. They used to write letters to each other, talking about how much they loved one another and how they couldn't wait to see each other once more. But over the years, Lucy's letters started to come less and less frequently, and their content was less and less romantic. One day, though, he finally got the news that Lucy had divorced him and married his friend. Mick didn't believe it at first and got home as soon as he could. It was only when he saw Lucy with his friend that it became real to him. He couldn't be too mad, though. They were living separate lives on opposite sides of the world. It was tough to be married to a soldier that was constantly serving overseas. Quitting the army, Mick tried to find something to fill the void left by Lucy. He traveled to various parts of the world, worked on an oil rig and several ships, and even found jobs on various construction sites. But nothing made him feel better. He was lonely as a man could be. He eventually found himself in a small wooden cabin and hid himself away. Over the years, Mick's hair grew long and gray, his beard became scraggly and unkempt, and he was almost unrecognizable. Mick started to farm the land around his cabin, growing his own food and never having to venture into town or come into contact with other people. He was just happy living in his own unhappiness. And if a medical professional had ever taken a look at him, they would have discovered that he was indeed in a deep state of depression. His wife had divorced him, and his family had shunned him for his decision to retreat into the woods. Mick had lost everything and everyone near and dear to him, and was in a terrible place. His work was the only thing that kept him going. As well as farming the land, he eventually became a gamekeeper for the nearby forest. This job suited him, and he could keep being reclusive and avoid people while being out in nature and enjoying the local wildlife. While he was depressed and felt like the entire world had turned its back on him, Mick really did throw himself into his job, caring for the animals, tracking them, documenting them, and helping them when they were in need of assistance. One day, while out in the forest, Mick heard a strange noise. He didn't know what it was, but he was sure he'd never heard it before. Mick set off searching for the source and found it several feet from him. It was a lynx trapped in a cruel device. Its leg was clearly broken, and the animal was in a lot of pain. Just as he was about to run over and help, he spotted someone coming out of the trees towards the lynx. A man with a gun walked up to the animal and quickly put it out of its misery. Before Mick could even say no, the man opened up the trap, picked up the corpse, and walked off without even blinking. Mick was distraught. He couldn't do anything about it. Hunting was not prohibited in those woods. He was about to turn and return to his cabin when he heard a small noise. He looked down to see two tiny lynx cubs, clearly the children of the poor, unfortunate lynx that had just been killed. They looked starving and thin, and so Mick had to make a choice. He could either help the cubs and provide them with what they needed, or leave them to fend for themselves in the wild. Mick knew what he had to do, so he picked them up and gently carried them back to his cabin, where he fed them and gave them water and milk to drink. It turned out that he was quite adept at looking after lynx cubs. Over the following weeks, he cared for them and ensured they were growing big and strong. He watched as they ran and played in his yard and would let them curl up and sleep in front of the fire in his cabin. They unwittingly became his pets. If Mick was honest with himself, he really enjoyed their company. Quite the strange attitude for a supposed recluse. Mick would even walk the lynxes in the forest and watch as they ran around. He did this every day for months. Eventually, those months turned into years, and the walks became part of their daily routine. Mick was feeling slightly better, but he was still far from the man he had been in the past. However, on a fateful day, his life changed forever, and it was all thanks to the lynxes. The day started off like any other, and Mick and the cats were walking along happily. But then, out of nowhere, several wolves pounced on them. They were large, strong, and clearly starving. They must have been tracking Mick and his lynxes, and now was their time to make a move. He believed that this was the end for him. There was no way he could defend himself against this pack of animals. But suddenly, Mick's lynxes pounced and started viciously fighting back. They dived into the attacking animals and unleashed hell on them, fighting not only for their lives, but also to protect Mick. The battle was harsh and rough, but eventually the attackers ran off, defeated. Mick was overjoyed and grateful, but that's when he noticed the state of his two lynxes. They were covered in blood, scarred, and in a lot of pain. Both limped over to him, whining quietly before collapsing at his feet. Kneeling down, Mick held them, telling them everything would be okay. He felt tears come to his eyes and quietly told them how much he cared for them before they slowly stopped breathing and slept away. They had given their lives to save Mick, and he would be eternally grateful for that. Burying the brave lynxes changed something in Mick. He was grateful for how they saved his life, and he would miss their company daily. Yet something good had come from their death. Mick realized that life really was short, and that he was throwing it away by being a recluse. Perhaps he was shunning people in his life he didn't know, but Mick did know that he had to make amends. So he returned to his home village, hitchhiking all the way. So Mick brought his story to a close. As he did so, he noticed George listening intently as he drove. The man had certainly never expected to hear such an engaging story when he picked up the hitchhiker on the side of the road. Still, in a way, George was glad that he was now a small part of Mick's story, helping him get his life back on track and taking steps to recover much of what he had lost. What did you think of this incredible and heartbreaking story? Would you have cared for the poor lynxes? And how would you have reacted when they came to defend you?